What is happening, everyone? Welcome back to another video, and today we'll be showing you how to storage max your PSP in 2024. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So yeah, I've been working on this video for quite a while now, and once again, it's supposed to be a simple video. This is like the fourth recording, and just like with our battery testing video, we have an entire spreadsheet that goes over all the details, so if you're interested, I highly recommend you go ahead and check it out, as I'll be trying to keep this video as simple as possible and just give you the gist of it. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started by answering the age-old question of what the maximum capacity that can be had on a PSP, at least in 2024. The short answer is 128 gigabytes. Which at this point you're probably like, what about those people online that claim to have 256 or even 512 working on the PSP and they actually show it? Hate to be the breaker of bad news, but they haven't actually tested it. They haven't actually filled the SD card to find out what happens next. So let me go ahead and show you exactly what happens. You see I tested 128, 256, 1TB, and even a 1.5TB, which I ended up returning. And yes, with the use of ZZ Blank and GUI format, I was able to format all these three and get them to read and work on the PSP. To the point where you can actually see a higher storage above 128, as well as loading up some files, but we'll get back to that in just a bit. First, let me show you the actual PSP limit by using the 1TB here. Let's go ahead and slot it in, and if you didn't know, the higher storage capacity that you have on an SD card, the longer it will take for the PSP to actually load it up. As you can see, we loaded a 1TB SD card, and we got a maximum of 441 gigabytes. And these numbers can fluctuate and will always be under 500 gigabytes. So that is the absolute limit. Now you're probably telling me, hey, it might be the actual adapter limit and not the actual PSP. Well, here's how I can prove that to you in two different ways. I have tested all 5 different adapters. They all have the exact same results. In fact, all these adapters perform the exact same, whether it comes to maximum readable capacity or read-write speeds. And the way I can prove that is using these high-quality Memory Stick Pro DRAM readers on my PC. So here I got the 1TB, and we're going to be inserting it here and plug it into my PC and see what comes up. If it's the limit of the actual adapter, we should see around 441 gigabytes. If it's the limit of the PSP, then we should see around 1TB. So let's take a look. And as you can see, it's showing 1TB, meaning that the PSP does in fact have a limit. So you're probably asking, where's that 2TB theory coming from? Well, if you didn't know, these memory cards are formatted using something called FAT32 file system, which is basically a method of storing files on a card. There's NTFS, exFAT, and many others out there. But FAT32 has been around for quite a while, it's kind of old, but when it comes to the PSP, it's perfectly fine. And the maximum capacity that you can have with a FAT32 file system is 2 terabytes. So for example, if you have a computer hard drive that is 4 terabytes and you try to format it with FAT32, the maximum usable capacity will be 2 terabytes. And that's basically where that theoretical 2 terabytes is coming from. And if you're to install a 1 terabyte on a PS Vita and run it through Adrenaline, yes, you'll also be seeing that 500 gigabyte limit as well. Meaning that although the PSP hardware should technically be able to do 2 terabytes, the software, however, is still limited to 500 gigabytes. So now that we have established the limit of the PSP being 500 gigabytes, what happens when you go beyond 128 gigabytes? Well, let me show you. Here I have a 256 card that I have formatted externally on my PC and copied over all my data from my working 128 gigabyte card, which has been working flawlessly for the past year. So what happens when you reach that 128 gigabyte limit? Or should I say, less than that? Well, let me show you. And as you can see, all the plugins are working, all the programs are showing up, your homebrews, PS1 titles, games, minis, videos, and you name it. Everything seems like it's working just fine. Just like with all the posts out there that claim that they have got 256 or 512 working. Unfortunately, once you start reaching that 100 gigabyte limit, you'll get either one of two things. Either things will not show up at all, or they will simply show up as corrupt on top of working files, which is quite unfortunate. And yes, I said around 100 gigabytes, so if you are using a 256, you will in fact get less storage than if you were to use a 128 gigabyte. And yes, I have also tested it on a PC by copying a bunch of video files until I surpassed 128 gigabytes, and then trying to read it through the adapter, which ended up showing me the same exact results, when some files are working while the others are just simply corrupt, or give me an error message if the things I'm looking at simply don't exist. So with all that being said, I hope we can finally put that to rest, and state the fact that the PSP has a limit of 500 gigabytes, whether it's in software or hardware, and as of 2024, we currently have no adapters that support beyond 128 gigabytes. Hope that is clear. 128 gigabytes is the absolute max limit. Which brings us to the dual card adapters. If I was able to get them to work, are they worthwhile? The answer is no. You're honestly better off just taping another SD card inside your EMD slot and calling it a day. And that's for a couple of reasons, with the first one being reliability. Instead of having one major failure point, you now have 3. 2 of them being the SD cards, and 1 being the controller on the adapter. Now why is that? Well, if any of these 3 fail, all your data is pretty much gone. And there's a high chance that you could lose all your data even if you get another adapter. So that's something that you definitely don't want if you care about your save data. You see, once you install these SD cards, you have to format them through the adapter. Meaning the data on these SD cards are no longer accessible unless you have them connected to an adapter. Which also means the only 2 ways you can transfer files to them is through either an external card reader or through the USB's mini USB port. which means you'll be transferring files at a maximum of 20 megabytes a second, which is basically USB 2.0 speeds. And if you're trying to fill your 256 or 512 gigabyte SD card, then it will take literal hours. And the third one being slower read-write speeds. So doing anything with the PSP using this adapter will take forever. It already takes long enough with a 128 gigabyte. You can only imagine what happens with a 256 or even a 512. Things will take way too long to load, way too long to exit, and even way too long to even power up to the point where you can actually browse your games. The fourth reason is that the controller on these things is not fast enough to process data onto two SD cards, meaning that running one SD card will actually run faster than two SD cards using this adapter. And the fifth and final reason would have to be the weak bodies on these things. They have two cavities for two SD cards. We already know how weak these things are, but it won't matter too much since you cannot write files to your SD cards unless they are running through the adapter, which at that point you might as well use the mini USB port on your PSP and leave it overnight to write files. So yeah, those are 5 different reasons. They have a much higher chance of failure, and they are just simply very, very slow. And the final question and topic I want to cover when it comes to these dual SD card adapters. First off, PhotoFast is an actual company that existed back then, and the original ones are of course no longer in production. People have claimed that the original PhotoFast ones do actually work with dual card adapters that are beyond 128 gigabytes, but the only forum posts that I can find of people actually getting them to work are from like 2 years ago. There are about 6 to 8 different models. There are some white ones, some black ones, and a bunch of different labeled ones that seem to work. But of course, these are nowhere to be found, and the general consensus is you just go out there, buy a bunch of different adapters from different sellers, and just hope that one of them works. That's the general consensus when it comes to the dual SD card adapters. As for what's compatible with them, as far as my research goes, you'll either be looking for a 256 Samsung Evo with a dual tone orange-white color, or the 200GB SanDisk. And it seems like not only the black one with the red text will work, but also the ones that are recent with the A1 rating. The two-tone Samsung ones are no longer in production. The 200GB red text black ones are no longer in production as well. However, the newer A1s are still in production. Which at this point, I decided to go back on Reddit and do one last thing, which delayed this video by a week. And that is to scour Reddit for comments where people have actually went beyond 128 successfully. I found a handful of people, messaged all of them, and only one of them replied by the name of Hexen84. In the case of Hexen84, they claimed that they managed to get two 200GB SD cards working with their dual adapter. They got it working by testing a bunch of different adapters that they purchased from different sellers until they found a combination that works. Not only that, but they also claimed that they have gotten 350GB worth of files transferred successfully without any problems. And I asked them for the exact model number of the SD card that they used, and here it is on screen. So I went ahead and scoured my local market for any 200GB SanDisk that I can find, and I found 3. One of them being the exact same model number, while the other 2 were slightly different revisions. So I ordered one of each. Except here's what happened. The first one arrived with this model number, did not work, and once the other 2 arrived, I was sent out higher grade SD cards. That being said, I did overpay for the 200GB ones that are outdated, so is it really a win? No, really. These are going back. One of these 2 was supposed to be the exact model that Hexen84 had. So yeah, none of these worked, and for good measures, I even got a 400GB that didn't work as well. So I hope that's clear. So with that being said, not only the adapters are extremely hard to find now, and are most likely nowhere to be found, but also the claimed working SD cards are no longer in production. So in 2024, it's definitely not worth your time to get it to work or to even look into it. Because even if you do, it's still not worth it. It's way too slow and unreliable. And the only thing we can hope for is that someone in the future could make an adapter that can go beyond 128 gigabytes. But as of 2024, that simply does not exist. So yeah, I talked way too long about these dual card adapters, even though they are not worth your time, but I just wanted to make things clear because there's so much scattered information out there and people are always asking the same questions, so if they do, maybe send them this video. And while we're here, let's quickly go over the build quality and how you can preserve these things and avoid fractures. So these 2 are the most popular ones. Pretty much everyone out there has at least one of these things. They work just fine until you drop it, which is the first thing that you should avoid at all costs. Whatever you do, do not drop these adapters. Drop it once on a hard surface and you have started a fracture that will only get worse every time you take it out and put it back in. And there are probably a couple dozen out there of you watching this video right now with a bunch of broken adapters. You see, when most people insert their memory card, they rarely check where they're pressing. They kind of just push in whatever and just call it a day, which would have been fine with an original card. However, with these SD card adapters, there is a cavity and there's a movable part, which is the micro SD. And more often than not, you'll be pressing onto the SD card instead of the actual memory card, since it is the bigger section. And you can probably guess what ends up happening. The micro SD goes in too far and starts fracturing the actual shell, which we can clearly see in this example. It goes in too far and things just start breaking apart. And every time you remove it and reinsert it, it only gets worse. However, with this specific model, I have noticed various levels of quality. Some are pretty solid, while others are pretty damn cheap and break pretty easily. So you should be pressing on this part and not the memory card itself. So that, combined with not dropping it, will drastically increase the longevity of your adapter. So I highly recommend that you pay attention of where you're pressing and press into the corner where the SD card is not. With all the storage talk out of the way, knowing that 128GB is the absolute max in 2024, I decided to go ahead and shift my testing towards performance and see what are the best settings and things that you could do to get the most out of your PSP. And just a heads up, all these little modifications will add up to a major difference in speed and performance, so make sure you stick around, and as always, all the information that I'm giving you will be in the spreadsheet so you can follow it step by step. Starting with micro SD cards. Is it overkill to get something so high-end that the PSP cannot utilize on paper? And the answer to that for the majority of people is a yes, it is a bit overkill. But it has in fact shown some benefits, which we'll quickly list right now. The first one being, of course, is faster transfer speeds if you're using a USB 3.0 reader. We have also experienced an improvement in loading speed with NC Portable, which is a homebrew, but when comparing the Ultra to the Extreme Pro, it has definitely shown an improvement. The next improvement in loading speeds that you'll encounter would have to be with compressed files. So if you didn't know, you can actually compress your games from ISO to around 5 different formats. In our case, we brought Liberty City Stories from 1.2GB all the way down to 607MB, which is a significant improvement. However, it does come with a caveat, and that is in-game stutter. Games like Grand Theft Auto that heavily rely on a constant stream of data from your SD card will experience significant stuttering, especially on a slow card or a slow format. We'll talk more about compression in just a bit, but with this next optimization, we greatly improve that. So anyways, back to the performance with compressed files on a fast card versus a regular card. Is there an improvement? And the answer to that is yes. I have experienced less stutter with a fast card versus a low-end card when playing a compressed version of Liberty City Stories. That being said, it's still not perfect, and for heavy games like Liberty City Stories, I highly recommend that you actually stick with ISO if you want the most absolute buttery experience. So once again, powering on your PSP, loading your game, quitting the game, when it comes to ISOs, there is no real difference. But when it comes to compressed files and some homebrew games, then there are some definite improvements that can be had. So either one here will do you just fine. Alright, so for this next one, check this out. We got two identical PSPs, both with a 95 V2 revision, both with 128GB SanDisk Ultra, with the same files on both SD cards. We're going to open up the favorites folder, which has around 165 games, and we're going to see which one loads up faster, and then I'll explain why. So here we go. And as you can see, the blue one has loaded a whole lot faster than the red one. And the reason is, if we go ahead and take out the SD cards, is that one of them was formatted inside the PSP, while the other was formatted on my PC. By default, when the PSP formats your SD card, it formats it with a cluster size of 32K. Meanwhile, on my PC, I manually formatted it with a 64K cluster, which is the maximum you can have on a FAT32 file system. Basically, you sacrifice some storage in return for some performance. In our case, with a 128GB SD card, I lost around 1.5GB worth of storage, but in return, I got an increase in performance, and it's very well worth it for 1.5GB. Basically, 32K is like having a bunch of smaller boxes that are harder to move, while 64K is like having a big box that is much easier to move. The bigger box will take up more space, but it's easier to move, while the smaller boxes take up less space, but are much harder to move with. So, hope that makes sense. Now the process is very simple, and here's how you do it. First things first, get yourself a micro SD card reader, and download the 3 files in the description down below: zzblank.image, Win32 Disk Imager, and GUI format. So get started by installing Win32 Disk Imager, hit next, 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 then create shortcut, next, and install. And before you launch it, you want to make sure that you have your SD card inserted, otherwise it's not going to show up. So now we can see in the drop-down menu we have G, and we can go ahead and confirm that is the SD card by checking our storage right here. Now if this is a brand new card, then there's nothing to worry about. Otherwise, if you have a bunch of files you want to back up, now is a good time to do it. Create a folder somewhere on your desktop, copy all your files, and once we're done formatting, we can put them back on. In our case, I already have it backed up, so there's no need. So now go ahead and browse for the image using this folder icon, and select the zzblank.image. Finally, we can go ahead and hit write. Which if you go ahead and check, we'll see that the SD card is no longer accessible. Then we're going to go ahead and open up GUI format. Make sure you double triple check that you have the right drive selected. Open up the drop menu for the allocation size and select 65,000 and hit start. And that's it. Your drive is now formatted in 64K cluster, and now you can go ahead and move back all your files onto the SD card. Now the next two here are very simple and straightforward, and they both require to have custom firmware. And yes, it can be done on both Infinity and Arc 4, however, it is much easier with Arc 4. It's still being updated in 2024, and has a ton of features, including a very nice user menu. So we'll start with Arc 4. So you'll want to move over to your extras menu, and open up the custom firmware settings. Scroll down to overclock, and set that to always, and then you want to scroll down and turn on skip Sony logos. And these two options will drastically speed up your PSP when it comes to loading. So yes, I would highly recommend that you have your PSP always running at max speed, including in the XMB, as it will speed up the folder read speeds, as well as the game load speeds, and of course we have tested it, and the results can be found on the spreadsheet. Now let me show you how to do it on Infinity. On your home screen, hit select, and you want to make sure that the CPU clock speed for both the game and the XMB are set to 333/166. Next, you want to go ahead and hit the recovery menu, scroll down to configuration, and enable skip logo at startup and boot screen. Hit back again, and I would recommend you go ahead and restart your PSP. And now you'll notice that when you go ahead and start your games, your game will start right up without going through the nostalgic splash screens. And the final tip is to go ahead and install the plugin called Categories Lite, because now that you have a 128GB SD card, you're going to have a ton of data, and you definitely want to make it not only load faster, but also make it easier to browse your games. As you can see, I have multiple folders, as if I had multiple SD cards, and I can browse through them a whole lot faster and easier than if they were all thrown into one folder. I've got one for applications, homebrew, PS1 titles, you name it, I made categories for each one. Now I'm not going to go into detail on how to actually set this up. The process is slightly different for Infinity and Arc 4, as the plugin's text file is slightly different, so if you want more details, again, you can go ahead and check out the spreadsheet. Now one interesting side note that I tested, the plugin actually makes loading slightly slower, but it makes up for it with the folders, and since you're going to be dividing up your files across different folders, those folders are naturally going to have less files than if they were to all be thrown on one folder. So overall, it will still be faster than running it directly on the SD card. And that is pretty much it. The only other tip I can give you is to actually get yourself a USB 3.0 card reader, so when you go ahead and transfer your files through a PC, you can get the full speed of your high-end card. Instead of taking hours, it could take 1 hour in total if you're moving around 100 gigabytes. And the last two things to talk about here would have to be the different options that I tested out on the custom firmware, which exist on both Arc 4 and Pro C/LME. Memory stick speedup actually made things worse when it comes to normal applications such as ISOs. Generally, things took ever so slightly longer to load. However, when testing it with NZ Portable, it actually loaded a whole lot faster. I think loading times got cut by like 10 seconds. But that being said, I'm not sure if it's just that game, or it could very well be for other homebrew as well. So for this one, this is going to be my first time actually making use of these cool features on Arc 4. So check this out. If we go ahead and open up the submenu, we'll see that we have different options. We have Launcher, XMB, PS1, Homebrew, UMD/ISO, Game, and Always. And what we could do here is have this option only load on Homebrews, which is pretty dope if you ask me. The devs have done a fantastic job. Shout out to Acid Snake for these cool features. That being said, stay tuned because we're going to have a dedicated video covering Arc 4 and all its cool features, showing you how to install it and all that good stuff. So yeah, memory stick speed up, I would recommend having it on Homebrew only. Now as for the forced memory option, you will find it on all PSP models except the 1000 model. You see, when the first PSP model released, which is the 1000 model, it came with only 32 megabytes of RAM. And then all the other models came with a second memory bank, for a total of 64 megabytes. However, none of them actually make use of it as all the games were developed for 32 megabytes. Meaning if you're playing native PSP games, PS1, minis, none of those games will actually make use of the extra 32 megabytes, as they were all developed with 32 megabytes. That way Sony can keep compatibility across all the different models. So when is it useful? Well, with homebrews, especially games like NZ Portable. So with that in mind, you can either set it to always, or for homebrew, either or will work just fine. And the final major thing to talk about here would be file compression. So if you're looking to actually store more files on your 128GB SD card, then this is something you definitely want to look into. Everyone's familiar with ISOs, which is the standard. Your games will work perfectly fine at their peak, but there are also CSO, CSO2, JSO, ZSO, and DAX. And basically with these compression formats, you can cut down your file size by around 2/3 of the original capacity. In the case of Liberty City Stories, it is a massive difference in storage size. However, there's a big caveat when using these compression formats, and that would be performance. Depending on what game you try, you may or may not notice any difference. However, with heavy games like Liberty City Stories that heavily rely on a constant stream of data from your SD card, well, these compressed files are going to definitely be a bottleneck. So I went ahead and did some testing, and found that JSO has the best performance out of the bunch here. The ZSO is a close second, but JSO definitely takes the cake. That being said, I've also done tests with a 64K versus 32K, as well as comparing the Extreme Pro to the Ultra. And surprise, surprise, there is a massive difference. Running a fast high-end SD card with 64K cluster size has a major impact on the loading speeds, especially when it comes to compressed files. So for that, it's another reason why you should get a high-end card, format your SD card in 64K cluster size, while using JSO as the best compression format when it comes to size and performance. Now the question is, how do you actually compress your files? Well, there are several ways, but the easiest one that I have used was an old app called PSP ISO Compressor. Now this app is pretty old, but it works like a charm, and it's pretty self-explanatory. But if you still need help, you can go ahead and check out the spreadsheet, as I have written a step-by-step for everything that I've talked about in this video in the description down below. And so, the conclusion, that I'm recording at like 2:15 in the morning. Now, this topic was supposed to be simple and straightforward, except it's kind of a rabbit hole because there's a lot of testing, a lot of variables, but what I did here is a bit of everything to give us an idea of what the best optimal experience could be. Having a high-end SD card, yeah, on paper and the results that I've shown you may not be as impressive, but it's all about these little things that add up to the entire experience. The biggest one I would have to say is the 64K cluster size. It's honestly the biggest difference in experience and loading speeds. It just makes everything a whole lot more snappier. But thankfully, I'm finally done with the SD cards and now I can move on with the ARC 4 videos, where I'll be showing you how to install it, how to upgrade, and showcasing all the sick features that it has. Again, I'm kind of disappointed at this video. Couldn't work on it for too long. I literally have no time. I come back from work pretty tired, so that's all you get. I got a lot of data, but not a whole lot of time to actually present the data in a nice way. So anyways, with that being said, hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you guys have any questions about something I haven't covered or talked about in detail, you can feel free to ask away in the comments, find me on Discord, or check out the FAQ on the spreadsheet. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.